Well, it is the running of the Boston Marathon. It is the 128th running of the Boston Marathon tomorrow. Hopkinton is celebrating 100 years of running it because it did not start in Hopkinton. As an Ashland resident, I will claim that the marathon started in Ashland. There's still a sign that's there that says the marathon started there. So we thought as we do this, as runners and spectators from around the world will be enjoying this incredible experience. Apparently, I don't run marathons, as you can tell. And since we're a city on the route of the marathon, we thought we would celebrate today with a Marathon Sunday hangout, and let's reflect on what we might learn from marathon running when it comes to our faith. And so we want to do that. And so I'm going to give you an opportunity at your tables. One, introduce yourselves, and then we're going to play a little bit of verse bingo this morning. I have 5 points to share with you with 5 verses, and let's see if you can guess what the 5 verses are. We're talking about running, okay? So some of you may know your Bible. We don't need to know verse references and all that sort of stuff, but if you can think of something that sounds like it comes from the Bible, share it with people at your table, and see if I mention it today, and that will be the bingo. If you can get 5 out of 5, bingo, okay? So take a moment, share that at your tables, and then we'll dive in and talk about this. You can do the same thing online. Jot down 5 verses that you might want to connect with or talk about, and we'll see if we can hit all 5. Take 30 more seconds. Okay, so we'll see if we hit your verses. You may have some that I don't have. That's okay. But we're going to look at 5 lessons we can learn about the marathon of faith from marathon running. Now, these are not my lessons. As I said, I'm not a runner. You just look at me. I don't run. I think running marathons, you're crazy. My wife runs marathons. She's crazy. But these are lessons actually from our very own Kurt Cooprider, who has run the Boston Marathon. That's him when he ran it many years ago. He's actually preaching this message in Hopkinton right now. And we have runners who have run marathons here. Where is Steve? Steve's here somewhere. Steve's run many marathons. So you can test to see if the lessons I'm sharing are actually true. And you can go and check with Steve during the hangout when we have Rocco's Donuts. You know, thousands of runners are running 26 miles and wish they could have a donut, and we're having donuts. So it tells you what. So a long time ago, a biblical writer equated the journey of faith to a marathon, to a running race. The writer of the book of Hebrews said in Hebrews 12:1 that we should run with endurance the race that is set before us. Check 1 if you put that down, right? Okay, that table's got 1. Good. He said that faith is a race. So what lessons can we learn about faith today? Well, I want to share 5 with you, and lesson 1, I think, is the most important. Number 1, run with purpose. When you are stepping into the life of faith, you have to run with purpose. This is true in a marathon as well. You run with purpose when you're running. You have a goal that you're reaching towards, whether it's 1 mile, 5 miles, 26.2, or the ultra marathons. You want to reach that goal and run with purpose. And Paul talks about this in Philippians 3:14. I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. Paul, writing to the Philippian church, wants to express an urgency about his faith, an urgency that drove him. And he references this urgency earlier on in the book. In Philippians 1:18, he's talking about this rumor that's going around in the Philippine area that there are people who preach the gospel to get money, and others who preach the gospel out of sincere motivations. And Paul says, what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of this, I rejoice. His purpose was that Christ would be proclaimed, regardless of the motivations of the person preaching, but that Christ would be shared and would be communicated. And he goes on in Philippians 3:8. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage, that I may gain Christ. And later on in Philippians 3, just 2 verses later, I want to know Christ. Yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his sufferings. Paul has a purpose in his faith. It is to know Jesus. That word know means to intimately connect with. Like a marriage, like a partner, like a lover, to connect with Jesus in such a way that I know him so intimately, so personally, and he knows me in the same way. Paul wants to gain Christ. When he describes it, he wants to gain the knowledge and experience of who the Messiah is, this deep, intimate connection. And he's so passionate about it, he's so urgent about it, that he wants to share his best friend with everybody he knows. And there's a reason Paul is so urgent about this. There's a reason Paul committed his life to sharing his faith with as many people as he could. It's a reason that the church today has largely lost. You see, when Paul went to Philippi, and when Paul went on his missionary journeys that are described in Acts, when Paul wrote this letter to the Philippians, the belief of the early church was that Jesus was coming back any minute. In fact, he was going to come back before the believers around them died. He was going to appear immediately, imminently. And so they needed to tell as many people as urgently and as quickly as possible because Jesus was coming back. When they wrote those words, I don't think they envisaged 2,000 years later us still reading them. And what has happened in the church today, and I think it happens very easily for all of us at periods of our life, is we lose the urgency of connecting with Jesus. It becomes tradition or ritual. It becomes something that we can just take our time with because, we don't know when Jesus is coming back. We don't know if it's tomorrow. Even though we say we believe that, we don't act like that. And I wonder if we have that same urgency and passion that Paul has. One, to know Christ, and two, to share Christ. And this is an easy test for you to evaluate for yourselves. If you are passionate about knowing Jesus, ask yourself, how much time do you spend getting to know him? How much time do you spend in his word, in talking with him, in reading about him, in studying about him, in reflecting on who he is? How much time do you spend in communicating with him? And about the urgency of sharing him, how urgent are you in your sharing? And I don't mean just words. How urgent are you in sharing? How urgent are we in sharing with how we live, with our words and our deeds? There is something that is urgent about the way Paul expresses this. And by the way, that urgency is what drove us to launch the Framingham campus for Faith Community. We wanted to create a community where more people could come, where more people could join. In fact, in the earliest months, I would use this phrase about our church, that we want to be a community of ever-growing disciples from one generation to the next until Jesus returns. We want to be disciples who are growing in intimacy with Christ, deeper and deeper. We want to be sharing that faith from one generation to the next, from our parents to children, from children to their children, from a village to the next generation, and to keep doing that until Christ returns. And that is still our passion to this day. It is still my passion, and I hope it's your passion as well. That we're not gathering here because we want to create a holy huddle of just people who think like us. We want to gather a community that is passionate about getting to know Jesus as intimately as we can and sharing that with others. I hope you will consider that and be a part of that with us. But that's lesson 1. What is lesson 2? So run with purpose. Lesson 2 is also important, kind of critical if you want to run a marathon. You've got to get off the couch. You've got to get off the couch. Let's put this in the words that James used, my faith group. That's a small group of people who get together to study the Bible, get to know each other, put what they've learned into practice. We've been studying James. And in my devotions, I've been doing James as a devotional. And we just came to the end of James last Wednesday in our group. So I started a new devotional, went back to my scripture union, and I opened it on the first day, and it started in the middle with James. So apparently God said, I'm not done with James. But here's a verse that James wrote, and this verse that James wrote actually was a hot debate in why people didn't want to put his book in the Bible. This is what he said in James 1:22. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. If you're going to start the journey of faith, you've got to get off the couch. You've got to get involved. You've got to do what it says. Do you know, and you know this, right? There are millions of runners who have completed hundreds of marathons in their head. They have watched marathons and gone, I could do that. I can run that. I can engage in that if I wanted to. I remember having a conversation with somebody. It's a slightly different metaphor, but he asked me to explain cricket to him. Impossible to explain to Americans. It's a British game. It makes no sense whatsoever. What game can you play for 5 days and have a draw? I don't understand. It's hard, right? But I explained it to him, and he had watched a little bit of it. So he looked at me and went, you know what? I bet you I could, if you gave me the cricket bat, which is like similar to a baseball bat but flat, if you gave me that, I bet you I could hit the cricket ball out of the park like a home run, except in cricket it's 6 runs. I know it's confusing. And I looked at him and I was like, yeah, you could in your head. And maybe if everything was set up for you, it could happen. But in reality, you've got to do a lot of stuff to do that. But you can't do it just by saying, I think I can. You know how many Christians we have who say, I believe I'm a Christian, but they don't really do what the Bible says. They don't do what it communicates. They don't spend time with Jesus. They don't interact with others. They don't participate in their faith. They don't serve others. It becomes an intellectual agreement. They're on the couch. They're not running the faith, the race of faith. James says, get off the couch. Paul encourages people to put into practice what they've learned. So what are some things you can do to get off the couch? I already mentioned one. Just spend time with Jesus. We call it devotions. Some people call it a quiet time. Others call it Father's time. A devotion doesn't have to be heavy and complex. Yes, you can spend hours doing it, but it could also be taking a moment, reading a few verses from Scripture, considering and thinking about those verses, and praying. And it can take 10 to 15 minutes out of your day. You can start there. And then you can progress into doing a morning devotion and an evening reflection. You can progress into praying at different times in the day. You can progress towards praying all day. There's a rhythm and a process to it, but it starts by getting off the couch. I'll never forget, Steve, you shared a story with me when I had injured my back and Steve had got injured doing something, I can't remember what. I think you had got hit by a bike or something like that. And Steve was talking about getting back to running. And he encouraged me by saying, Dorian, you don't need to run 3 miles or 4 miles. You can run half a mile. You've got to start somewhere. And it was this encouragement that it starts with a step. It starts with a small action. And so often we fail to get to the large thing because we think we have to start with the large thing. Like many things, you achieve the bigger things by taking the small steps. In fact, there's an app you can get. I think it's called Couch to 5K. I wish we could create an app like that for faith. I don't know what the 5K equivalent would be in faith, but from couch to 5K faith, right? But it starts by getting off the couch. One of the ways you can do that is attending services. You're here, that's great. But you know what's happened in our country since COVID? Regular church attendance that used to be 2 to 3 times a month, it's dropped to 1 time a month. People just don't participate anymore. And then they wonder why they're feeling disconnected. A long time ago, a person was questioning a priest at a fire and asking him, connected in his faith. And the priest was quiet, didn't say anything, but grabbed some tongs, grabbed a coal out of the fire and put it on the side and just watched it. And never said anything, because priests are annoying that way. But the acolyte who was with the priest watching that went, oh, he got it. If he wants his faith to burn bright, it needed to stay in the fire. It needed to stay connected with others. So attend services, spend time with Jesus, connect with the community, explore compassionate acts, practice the rhythms of faith, prayer, submission, service, silence, solitude. We'll talk about those more in just a little bit. But there are rhythms to faith that we can all practice. And we're practicing one today. It's called celebration. We're going to have a hangout and celebrate with each other. But these are ways where we can get off the couch. And that really is the big takeaway I hope you'll get from this message. That when it comes to the marathon of faith, don't be a spectator. Be a participant. Get into the race. So, lesson 1, run with purpose. Lesson 2, get off the couch. Lesson 3, have some running partners. Now, there's a reason that picture is snowy. If you run the Boston Marathon, you know that, and if you're a marathon runner, you know that practice is critical. You have to get out and do your runs. The problem is you have to build up your runs towards your long runs over the weekends, where you're running 18 to 20 miles every weekend, getting closer to the marathon date. The challenge with the Boston Marathon is that those 18 to 20 mile long runs are in the middle of the Boston winter. And so if you're in this area, you need to wake up at 3, 4, 5. What time do you wake up, Steve, to practice? Like 4 a.m., 5 a.m.? Depends on what time you have to get to work, right? And then you do, and how fast you run. No, not that anymore. But it's very hard when it's 15 degrees outside to get up and go and run. It's very hard when it's 80 degrees to get up and go and run. But middle of winter when it's dark and you're tired, but having some partners who can come alongside you and help and get you up to go, that's critical. And we certainly know about that. Hebrews 10 talks about this. Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Now, the word the day, they're talking about the return of Jesus. Do you see the urgency in that early church? Jesus is coming. He's coming any minute. So keep the faith. Let's encourage one another. Let's bring courage to one another. Let's spur one another on. Let's lift each other up. Let's help each other run better. And there's something about running with others that makes a huge difference and helps people. It's why in our church we talk a lot about joining faith groups. Faith groups are these groups of people committed to studying the Bible, getting to know each other, and putting what they've learned into practice. We encourage people to get into smaller groups. Why don't you get to know others? But you can also get to know the Bible and dive into it. You can receive encouragement from one another. I mentioned our faith group studying James. The questions and discussions in our small group have totally opened up different images and perspectives of James to me. It was so encouraging to hear from others as we processed some very tough passages in the book of James. Now, imagine if you could regularly just connect with others. Think of it like a book club, except your book is the Bible, or a book in the Bible. But there are other running partners we offer at Faith Community. When you're feeling like life is getting the better of you, when you feel like you hit a hardship or a struggle, or when you encounter, as we all do in our lives, habits that we can't break, there's a group that helps people in that. It's called Celebrate Recovery, to help with life's hurts, habits, and hang-ups. We have a number of people who participate in it. It's a great way for you to get encouragement from other people. We also offer ways where you can serve and encourage people through your gifts. You know how encouraging it is to parents when they have partners who guide their children through faith? That's what we call faith kids, where volunteers give their time to spend time holding a baby, singing a song, sharing a story, like they're doing right now up in Faith Kids. And they come alongside parents and help parents as they share their faith with others. These are great ways where you can use your giftedness, you can use your abilities, you can use your time, you can use your hurts, you can use your brokenness to encourage others. When we think about Paul, this great writer of the books in the Bible, and we think about how powerful he is, so often we think of him as an individual solo pastor or apostle who worked on his own, and he was just magnificent. Would it surprise you to find out that Paul almost never worked alone? In fact, when you look at how Paul operated, so much of the focus is on him as a solo leader, but really everything he did was about a team. He had a team-based approach to ministry. Hellerman, who's a commentator, writes about Paul's practice, that it was deeply relational, that team ministry characterizes Paul's journeys and his work throughout the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, he's recruited by Barnabas. He goes to teach in Antioch with Barnabas. And then we shared that in Antioch, this church where Christians were first called Christians, there is a team of leaders. Here's what it says in Acts 13. Now, in the church as Antioch, there were prophets and teachers: Barnabas, Simeon called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. See the team? When Paul and Barnabas return from Jerusalem in Acts 15, they bring with them Judas and Silas. What is striking in regards to Paul, Hellerman writes, is how seldom Paul functions as the sole subject of the narrative, and how often, in contrast, he is in ministry as a collaborative effort. Here's an example. In the book of Acts, we are told that Paul worked with Barnabas, Silas, Timothy, Luke, Priscilla and Aquila, Timothy and Erastus, Gaius and Aristarchus, while Paul's return trip to Jerusalem in Acts 20 involved a bevy of people. He was accompanied by Sopater, son of Pyrrhus from Berea, Aristarchus and Secundus, Gaius from Derbe, Timothy, Tychicus, Trophimus. Paul was no lone ranger. And I bet you don't even know half of the names that I mentioned. That wasn't the point. The point was that Paul worked with others. What Paul achieved and what we celebrate about all his writings came because of a team-based approach. My point is, don't run the ministry of faith alone. Have running partners. Have people who come alongside you and who can help you and connect with them. So, run with purpose, get off the couch, have running partners. What's lesson 4? Use the water stations. What happens, Steve, to a runner who doesn't use the water stations? They cramp and dehydrate. They can't survive. And what we're talking about is refreshment, coming alongside and having refreshment. In 1 Corinthians 16, Paul talks about being refreshed by others. I was glad when Stephanus, Fortunatus, and Achaicus arrived, because they have supplied what was lacking from you, because the church he's writing to weren't with him. For they refreshed my spirit, and yours also. Such men deserve recognition. And in fact, in Proverbs 11:25, it says, a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes will be refreshed. Use the water stations. Water stations for refreshment in a race can be equated to activities in the life of faith that refresh your soul and refresh your spirit and help you keep going. Certainly people play a role in that. But there are other things that are vital to refreshing your soul. One of the things is what we call soul care. I'm able to do this because of my job, but I can take a regular soul care day where I take a day and I practice and reflect on how to nurture my own soul, how to refresh my own soul. But it's a practice that we're using actually in the work world today. Ever heard of a mental health day? It's a similar thing with a slightly different focus. You see, soul care is about getting closer to Jesus and getting refreshed by the Spirit, refreshed by the Bible, refreshed in some spiritual practices. But so often we feel like our souls are crushed and hopeless and without help because we haven't taken the time to refresh our souls. There's a story about some Europeans who came to journey through Africa, and they were pushing the journey as hard as they could, and they were rushing, moving as fast as they could. Day 1, they went as many miles as they could. Day 2, they pressed forward anymore. And on day 3, the tribe that was helping them refused to leave. And the Europeans got really upset because they needed to get to the goal ahead of the other Europeans who were trying to get there. But this tribe said, no. They said, we have gone so fast that we need to spend a day waiting for our souls to catch up. We work so fast in the American culture, we drive so quickly that we've left our souls behind, I think. And we would do well to take time daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly to let our souls catch up. Daily is your quiet time with God to reflect, to practice mindfulness by reflecting on the Bible. Weekly is taking a day of Sabbath, if you can, where you're going to play and pray, is how Eugene Peterson talks about the Sabbath. Spend time praying, spend time playing. Monthly, find a way to break that rhythm up so that you can get the rest you need. Annually, we call it vacation, but put some time into your vacation where you might want to let your soul be refreshed. There's a practice we have here, a class you can take that teaches about this. It's called emotionally healthy discipleship. In fact, we have a new class starting soon on emotionally healthy spirituality that talks about soul care and practice. But you can also use some of these books. These are just introductory books on this. There are books that are much deeper. But Gary Thomas, talking about sacred pathways, talks about different ways different people approach having their souls refreshed. Some people love to read intellectual biographies and deep academic books. That's how they are refreshed intellectually. Others need silence. Others need to get out into nature. Still others need to gather with people. But Sacred Pathways is a great way to find ways to connect with God. Richard Foster's classic called Celebration of Discipline is talking about the spiritual disciplines. And he mentions inner disciplines, external disciplines, and corporate disciplines. And there's a whole history of them. But they carry things like silence, practicing not speaking, practicing stilling your voice and stilling your mind, solitude, getting alone and being alone, submission, where you choose to submit to those around you and others, practicing things like service, celebration, confession. He mentions those and a bunch of others. And Ruth Haley Barton wrote a book called Sacred Rhythms, which is just a different take on those disciplines by calling them rhythms. Some people don't like the word discipline. Rhythms is helpful. But this idea of rhythms of ebbing and flowing in my faith so that I can get refreshed. These are the water stations of the marathon of faith. And we would do well to practice them if we want to keep running and keep being a participant. Because believe it or not, you can cramp in your faith. I've experienced that multiple times in my journey of life, of faith. I've experienced times where I have not spent time in the Word, not spent time in devotions, not spent time in prayer, and I begin to feel like Jesus isn't there anymore. I begin to feel like my prayers are bouncing off the ceilings, but really they're not because I'm not even saying them. And I begin to find life a little harder, and I begin to cramp spiritually because I haven't been using these opportunities to be refreshed. So run with purpose. Get off the couch. Have running partners. Use the water stations. And here's number 5. Finish strong. That's Kurt Cooprider finishing the Boston Marathon. There's something about, what's the expression? It's right on Hereford, left on Boylston. Is that right? Or did I get the turns wrong? Right on Hereford, left on Boylston. Those are the last 2 turns. And then you turn onto Boylston, and it's, about a mile, half a mile, something like that? It's a long stretch. And you can see the finish line. But there's something about that last step where people seem to speed up, people seem to smile, people seem to be enjoying themselves because the 18 through 23 miles of pain are behind them, and they can see the end, and they want to finish strong. Paul talks about this in 2 Timothy. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I've kept the faith. This is Paul writing to Timothy right at the end saying, it's coming to an end. I can see it. I can feel it. I can taste it. And I'm going to keep going. It's interesting that earlier he talks to Timothy about, if I'm going to finish the race and you're going to take over from me, here's how you can finish strong as well, Timothy. And he gives him 3 things to do. He says to Timothy, as you fulfill your charge, here's what I want you to do. Keep your head in all situations, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, discharge all the duties of your ministry. 4 things he gives him. 4 things to finish strong. Number 1, keep your head. That phrase in Greek literally means sober up. Don't get inundated, don't get flooded by emotional anxiety or emotional tension or anger about what is going on. Keep your head as you run the race of faith. And trust me, in the world we live in, there are so many things that get thrown at us that make us lose our head, that make us not be sober, make us be angry or drunk with rage or frustration or hopelessness. His instruction to Timothy is keep your head. Endure hardship. There is something that happens in the race of faith that we have to keep going, and it will be hard, but one foot in front of the other keeps us working. And if you're going to keep doing this, do the work of an evangelist. Share your faith. Witness to others. Tell others about who Jesus is. There's something refreshing in sharing your faith and helpful as you keep going. And then fulfill your calling and giftedness. Discharge all the duties of your ministry. If we're going to finish strong, if we're going to be an ever-growing community, if we're going to be a community of ever-growing disciples from one generation to the next, we need to keep our heads. We need to endure hardship and struggle. We need to do the work of the evangelists by witnessing to others, especially those of the next generation, and then fulfill our callings in the ways we are called to do this. So run with purpose. Get off the couch. Have running partners. Use the water stations and finish strong. Did anybody get bingo? Close, some of you. Most of you say no, but hopefully you learned something then. I want you to notice something that Paul in Hebrews 11 talks about people of the faith who have gone before us. Starting all the way back from Adam, he lists people of faith all the way through to the modern day of the writing of the book of Hebrews. And he says to the people he's writing to, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. Look at this picture again of finishing strong as Kurt focuses on the journey ahead. The spectators cheering him on lift you and give you energy. People talk about the Wellesley tunnel of noise that lifts people at the hardest time. In the race of faith, the cloud of witnesses, the spectators, are those who have gone before, who cheer us on from heaven, who cheer us on from the past. And certainly we can encourage one another as we run together. But remember that the goal here is, when it comes to the marathon of faith, don't be a spectator, be a participant. Let the cloud of witnesses cheer you on in your faith. And let's run with perseverance the race marked out for us.